The gunshots echoed across the dusty plains as Penelope Ward clutched her children tightly to her chest, their small bodies trembling against her as they huddled beneath the overturned wagon. Blood trickled down her temple, mixing with sweat and tears as she struggled to keep her breathing steady, knowing that if Harold found them now, there would be no escape. Alpine, Texas, 1876. The summer heat bore down mercilessly on the small frontier town, wavering in ripples above the sun-baked earth. Penelope had never imagined her life would come to this, fleeing in the dead of night with 5-year-old Thomas and 3-year-old Alina, nothing but a small bundle of possessions, and the desperate hope of freedom driving her forward. "Mama," Thomas whispered, his voice quivering with fear. "Is Papa coming?" Penelope pressed a finger to her lips, willing her son to silence. Alina's face was buried against her shoulder, small fingers gripping the worn fabric of Penelope's dress. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. "Penny," Harold's voice boomed across the open terrain, slurred with whiskey and rage. "I know you're out here. Bring my children back to me now." She closed her eyes, fighting the memories that threatened to overwhelm her. Harold's fists connecting with her jaw, the accusations, the bruises she'd hidden beneath high-collared dresses, the terror in her children's eyes as they witnessed their father's mounting violence. 3 days ago, when he'd threatened the children directly, something inside her had finally broken free. She'd waited until he passed out in a drunken stupor before gathering what little she could carry and fleeing with Thomas and Alina. The hoofbeats grew louder, and Penelope's heart hammered against her ribs. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in the open expanse of scrubland stretching before them. The wagon that had been her salvation after hitching a ride with a sympathetic farmer now stood overturned, its wheels shattered by Harold's bullet. "I'll find you, Penny," Harold's voice carried on the hot wind. And when I do, a second set of hoofbeats approached, faster and more determined than Harold's meandering mount. Penelope held her breath, clutching her children tighter. "That's far enough, Ward." The voice was deep, steady, and unfamiliar. Penelope risked a glance around the edge of the wagon. A tall figure sat astride a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the setting sun. The wide brim of his hat cast shadows across his face, but she could make out the glint of a star pinned to his vest. "This ain't your business, Kendrick," Harold spat. "That's my wife and my children." "It became my business when you started firing shots across open country," the stranger replied, his hand resting casually on the holster at his hip. "I've had complaints from 3 different homesteaders about a madman with a gun. Time to head back to town, sober up, and cool down." "Not without what's mine," Harold insisted, his voice rising. Penelope saw the stranger Kendrick shift slightly in his saddle. "I don't see anything of yours out here, just a broken-down wagon and open country." Harold's laugh was ugly. "You're hiding them. I know they came this way." "The only thing I'm hiding is my patience, which is wearing mighty thin," Kendrick replied. "Now turn that horse around and head back to town before I arrest you for disturbing the peace." The standoff lasted several heartbeats before Harold finally yanked his horse's reins. "This isn't over," he growled, but he turned his mount and began riding away. Penelope waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before allowing herself to breathe again. The stranger dismounted and approached the wagon cautiously. "Madam, are you hurt?" he called softly. Penelope hesitated, clutching her children tightly. "I won't harm you," he continued. "But that cut on your head needs tending, and it'll be dark soon. Not safe to be out here with little ones." Summoning her courage, Penelope emerged from behind the wagon, one child in each arm despite their growing weight. The man before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a storm cloud. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with touches of copper. "Riley Kendrick," he introduced himself, "Deputy Marshal for Alpine County." "Penelope Ward," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "These are my children, Thomas and Alina." Riley's eyes took in her condition quickly, the torn dress, the bruises visible on her arms, the exhaustion evident in her stance. Understanding dawned in his expression. "He'll be back once he sobers up," Riley said simply. Penelope nodded, fighting back tears. We have nowhere to go. Riley replaced his hat and glanced at the setting sun. My ranch is about 3 miles east of here. It's not much, but there's a spare room where you and the children can rest safely tonight. Penelope stiffened. I cannot impose, it's no imposition, Mrs. Ward. Just offering shelter to travelers in need. His voice was gentle but firm. Harold Ward has a reputation in these parts. I wouldn't leave a dog to his mercies, let alone a mother and her children. Elinor began to whimper softly against Penelope's shoulder, exhaustion and hunger finally overwhelming the child's fear. Thomas stood stoically at her side, his small face set in determination beyond his years. We're much obliged, Mr. Kendrick, Penelope finally said, her pride giving way to practicality. But I can only accept if you'll allow me to work for our keep. I'm handy with a needle and can cook and clean. A hint of a smile touched Riley's lips. We can discuss terms tomorrow, Mrs. Ward. For now, let's get you and your children to safety before nightfall. Riley helped them gather what few possessions had survived the wagon crash, then lifted Thomas onto his horse with ease. He offered his hand to Penelope, who hesitated only briefly before allowing him to help her and Elinor up behind Thomas. Riley took the reins and began leading the horse eastward, walking alongside with long, measured strides. Is Papa going to find us? Thomas asked, his voice small against the vast silence of the plains. Riley looked up at the boy, his expression serious. Not tonight, son. Tonight you're going to have a hot meal and a safe place to sleep. That's a promise. Penelope felt something inside her chest loosen slightly at the simple conviction in his words. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that tomorrow might be different from today. The Kendrick ranch appeared as the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon, a modest homestead set against the backdrop of rolling hills. A small main house constructed of timber and stone stood proudly alongside a well-kept barn and corral. No grand mansion, but solid and well-maintained, speaking of care and hard work. It's not much, Riley said as they approached, but it's peaceful. My nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. It's beautiful, Penelope replied honestly, taking in the blooming wildflowers that bordered the path to the house. A bark announced their arrival before they reached the porch, and a large black and white dog bounded toward them, tail wagging furiously. That's Scout, Riley explained as Thomas's eyes widened. He's noisy but gentle. As if to prove the point, Scout stopped short of the horse, sitting obediently when Riley raised his hand. Stay, boy. Riley helped Penelope and the children down, Thomas immediately gravitating toward the dog with curiosity overcoming his fear. Can I pet him, Mama? He asked, looking up at Penelope with the first spark of childhood excitement she'd seen in months. If Mr. Kendrick says it's all right, she replied cautiously. Riley nodded. He loves children. Go ahead, son, just let him sniff your hand first. As Thomas carefully approached Scout under Riley's guidance, Penelope felt Elinor stir against her shoulder. The little girl lifted her head, blonde curls matted with dirt and tears. Where are we, Mama? She asked, rubbing tired eyes with small fists. Somewhere safe for tonight, sweetheart, Penelope assured her, though uncertainty clouded her thoughts. How long before Harold tracked them here? How far would they need to run to truly escape him? Riley led them inside, lighting lamps that cast a warm glow over simple but comfortable furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and though unlit in the summer heat, Penelope could imagine its warmth during winter months. The spare room is through there, Riley indicated a doorway off the main living area. It's not fancy, but the bed's clean. There's a small cot for the boy, and we can make a pallet for the little one. Penelope took in the tidy home with surprise. She'd expected a bachelor's quarters sparse and functional. Instead, the modest home showed signs of care. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes ranging from practical farming guides to poetry. A rocking chair sat by the window with a half-finished carving on the small table beside it. You have a lovely home, Mr. Kendrick, she said softly. Something like sadness flickered across his face. My sister used to live here with me. She had a knack for making a place feel like home. He cleared his throat. She moved to San Antonio last year after marrying. Before Penelope could respond, Thomas darted inside, Scout at his heels. Mama, Mr. Kendrick has chickens and horses and cows, just a few of each, Riley clarified, enough to get by. He moved toward the kitchen area. You folks must be hungry. I can heat up some stew. Please let me, Penelope said quickly, setting Alina down. It's the least I can do to thank you for your kindness. Riley hesitated, then nodded. Much obliged. Been a while since I've had a woman's touch in the kitchen. A flush crept up his neck as he seemed to realize how his words might sound. I mean, I understand, Mr. Kendrick, Penelope said, offering a small smile. Sometimes it's nice to have someone else tend the cooking fire. While Riley showed Penelope where he kept his supplies, the children cautiously explored their new surroundings. Alina, recovered somewhat from her exhaustion, shadowed her brother as he examined the strange and wonderful objects that filled the deputy marshal's home. What's this? Thomas asked, pointing to a strange instrument hanging on the wall. Riley glanced over. That's a dulcimer. It's a musical instrument. Can you play it? Alina asked, her voice barely audible. Not very well, Riley admitted with a self-deprecating smile. My sister was the musician in the family. As Penelope worked to heat the stew, adding a few herbs she found in Riley's modest pantry, she watched him interact with her children. There was a gentleness to the big man that contradicted his imposing appearance. He answered Thomas's endless questions with patience, and when Alina shyly offered him the small rag doll she carried everywhere, he accepted it with solemn gravity, complimenting its stitching as though addressing a lady of quality. It had been so long since the children had been around a man who didn't frighten them. The realization sent a sharp pang through Penelope's heart. They ate at the small table, the stew simple but filling. Riley complimented Penelope's additions to his basic recipe, and for a brief moment, the tension that had been her constant companion began to ease. After the meal, exhaustion quickly overtook the children. Penelope helped them wash with water Riley had heated and tucked them into the promised beds. They fell asleep almost instantly, secure for the first time in days. When she returned to the main room, Riley was seated at the table, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she approached. They're asleep, she said softly, taking the seat across from him. Mr. Kendrick, Riley, he interrupted gently. If we're sharing a roof, even temporarily, Riley will do. Penelope nodded slowly. Riley, then, I need to know, what happens tomorrow? Riley reassembled his weapon with practiced movements before answering. That depends on what you want to happen, Mrs. Ward. Penelope, she corrected. Or Penny, I suppose, though I've grown to dislike the name. Penelope, he agreed. Harold will be looking for you and he won't stop easily. Men like him rarely do. You know him well. Riley's expression hardened. Well enough. He's been in my jail cells 3 times in the past year. Drunk and disorderly, mostly, but there was a fight at the saloon last winter when he nearly killed a man. He paused. I suspected there was a wife at home bearing the brunt of his temper, but it wasn't your place to interfere, Penelope finished for him, no accusation in her tone. It was the way of things. A man's home was his castle, and what happened within those walls stayed there. I should have done more, Riley said quietly, surprising her. I'm sorry for that. Penelope looked down at her hands, noting the fading bruises on her wrists where Harold had grabbed her during their last confrontation. You're helping now, Riley nodded, but his expression remained troubled. The law is complicated when it comes to marriage. In the eyes of many, a husband has rights to his wife and children. And in your eyes, Penelope asked, meeting his gaze directly. In my eyes, no man has the right to harm those weaker than himself, Riley replied firmly. Especially not those he's sworn to protect. A weight lifted from Penelope's shoulders at his words. I cannot go back to him, she whispered. He will kill me eventually, and I fear for my children. Then you won't go back, Riley stated simply, as though it were already decided. The question is, where will you go? Do you have family somewhere? Penelope shook her head. My parents passed years ago. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but I haven't spoken to her since my marriage. She hesitated. Harold controlled my correspondences, understanding darkened Riley's expression, common tactic among men like him. Isolation makes control easier. I have some savings, Penelope continued. Not much, just what I managed to hide away over the years, perhaps enough for train tickets eastward, but traveling alone with two small children is dangerous, Riley finished. And Harold might anticipate that direction. They sat in silence for a moment, the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel the only sound beyond the occasional creak of the settling house. I propose this, Riley finally said. Stay here for a few days. Rest, gather your strength, think about your next steps. This place is remote enough that Harold won't find you easily, and I can keep an eye on his movements in town. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition, Riley interrupted gently. The house has been too quiet since Sarah left. And as I said before, you can help with cooking and such if it makes you feel better about the arrangement. Penelope studied his face, searching for hidden motives, but found only sincerity in his storm-gray eyes. Why would you do this for strangers? Riley's gaze shifted to the doorway where her children slept. Because no child should grow up afraid, he said simply, and because it's the right thing to do. In that moment, Penelope realized how rare it was to meet a truly good man. Thank you, she whispered. We'll stay just until I can form a proper plan. Riley nodded, seeming satisfied. Then it's settled. Tomorrow I'll need to ride into town for my deputy duties, and to see what Harold is up to, I'll bring back some supplies and any news. Will you tell anyone we're here? Penelope asked, unable to keep the fear from her voice. No, Riley assured her. As far as anyone needs to know, I'm just a bachelor deputy living alone on his modest ranch. He stood, stretching his tall frame. You should get some rest, Penelope. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. As Penelope settled into the unfamiliar bed that night, her children's soft breathing beside her, she wondered at the strange turn of events that had brought them to this place. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear of what the night might bring. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Penelope woke to the unfamiliar sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, disorientation gripped her before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She glanced at her children, still sleeping peacefully. Thomas's arm protectively draped over his sister even in slumber. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted through the house. Penelope quickly dressed in her worn but clean spare dress and pinned her honey-brown hair into a simple knot before gently rousing the children. "Where are we?" Thomas asked sleepily before remembering. "Oh, the Marshal's house, Deputy Marshal," Penelope corrected gently. "And yes, we're at Mr. Kendrick's ranch. Remember to be on your best behavior and thank him for his kindness." They found Riley in the kitchen, competently managing breakfast despite his earlier comments about appreciating a woman's touch in the cooking. He looked up as they entered, a smile warming his features. "Good morning," he greeted them. "Thought you might be hungry after yesterday's ordeal. You didn't need to cook for us," Penelope said, moving immediately to assist him. "I would have been happy to manage breakfast." "I'm used to early risings," Riley replied with a shrug. "Already fed the animals and checked the fences. Besides, you looked like you needed the rest." Breakfast was a simple affair of bacon, eggs, and biscuits, but to Penelope and her children, it tasted like a feast. Thomas, initially shy, soon warmed to Riley's presence, especially when the deputy offered to show him how to feed the chickens later. Even Alina, normally reserved around strangers, especially men, accepted a biscuit directly from Riley's hand with a whispered "thank you." "I need to ride into town today," Riley explained as they finished eating. "Have to check in at the office and make my rounds. I'll be back by sundown." Penelope nodded, trying to hide her nervousness at the thought of him leaving. Will you see my husband?" Riley's expression grew serious. "Likely. I need to gauge what he's doing. If he's organizing a search party or causing trouble, don't worry, I won't give anything away." "What should I tell people if they ask about your absence?" he continued. "Is there a story you'd prefer I stick to?" Penelope considered this. "The truth, or part of it, that you found me and the children stranded with a broken wagon, Perhaps say you helped us to the stage coach station and sent us on our way to San Antonio." Riley nodded approvingly. "Good thinking." Simple, close enough to truth to be believable, and sends him looking in the wrong direction. He rose from the table. "While I'm gone, please make yourself at home. There's plenty of food in the pantry and the pump out back has good clean water. Just one rule." "Yes," Penelope asked. "If anyone approaches the property, anyone at all, take the children and hide in the root cellar behind the house. The entrance is covered with a trapdoor under the apple tree. It's well hidden and stocked with emergency supplies." The seriousness of their situation came rushing back, dispelling the brief domestic tranquility of the morning. Penelope nodded solemnly. "I understand." Riley donned his hat and gun belt, checking his revolver before holstering it. At the door, he hesitated. "I should be back before dark." "If I'm not," his voice trailed off. "We'll manage," Penelope assured him, though her heart raced at the thought. "Be careful, Riley." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Always am." After Riley departed, Penelope set about making herself useful. She swept the floors, straightened the main room, and discovered a basket of mending that clearly needed attention. The simple domestic tasks calmed her nerves and gave purpose to her day. The children, initially wary of exploring without their mother's direct supervision, gradually grew bolder. Thomas appointed himself Aliner's protector as they ventured into the yard, always staying within sight of the house as Penelope had instructed. Scout accompanied them, his presence both playful companion and vigilant guardian. By midday, Penelope had prepared a simple lunch and called the children in from their explorations. As they ate, Thomas chattered excitedly about the chickens and the vegetable garden behind the house. "Mr. Riley has carrots growing, Mama, and tomatoes. Can we help take care of them while we stay?" "If Mr. Kendrick allows it, perhaps," Penelope replied cautiously, not wanting to encourage her son to think of this as anything but a temporary shelter. "I like him," Aliner said quietly, surprising Penelope with her unprompted comment. "He's not loud like Papa." Penelope's heart ached at the simple observation. "No, sweetheart, Mr. Kendrick is very different from your father." After lunch, as the summer heat intensified, Penelope settled the children for a nap and continued with her tasks. She found herself drawn to Riley's bookshelf, running her fingers over the spines of volumes she would never have been permitted to touch in her own home. Harold had little use for books, considering them a waste of time and money. She selected a volume of poetry, settling into the rocking chair by the window where she could watch the road while reading. The words transported her to places she'd only dreamed of visiting, and for a brief hour she allowed herself the luxury of imagination. The afternoon passed peacefully until the sound of approaching hoofbeats jolted Penelope from her reading. Panic surged through her as she rushed to the window, relief flooding her system when she recognized Riley's tall figure. He was returning earlier than expected, but something was wrong. Even from a distance, she could see he was slumped in the saddle and his horse was moving at an uneven pace. Penelope rushed outside, her heart pounding. As Riley drew closer, she saw the dark stains spreading across his shirt and the grim set of his jaw as he fought to remain upright. "Riley!" she cried, running toward him as he struggled to dismount, nearly falling from the saddle. Penelope reached him just as his knees buckled, managing to support some of his weight as he slid to the ground. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed them against his side. "Harold!" she whispered, helping him toward the house. Riley shook his head, his breathing labored. "Ambush, on the road back, 2 men never seen before," he grimaced in pain. "Hired guns, most likely." Terror gripped Penelope's heart. "He's looking for us." "They weren't looking for you," Riley assured her, leaning heavily against her as they made slow progress toward the house. "Just after money, my badge, made me a target." Whether this was truth or meant to comfort her, Penelope couldn't tell. What mattered now was tending his wound before the children saw him in this state. "The children are napping," she told him. "Let me get you inside and see to that wound." Once inside, Penelope helped Riley to his bedroom, a space she hadn't entered before. Like the rest of the house, it was simple but well kept, dominated by a large bed with a hand-carved headboard. I need to cut away your shirt, she told him, helping him lie back on the bed. Where do you keep your medical supplies? Kitchen cabinet. Above the stove, Riley managed, his face pale but composed. Been shot before, not as bad as it looks. Penelope hurried to gather what she needed: clean cloths, a basin of water, whiskey for disinfecting, and the small medical kit Riley had indicated. When she returned, he had managed to remove his gun, belt, and vest, but struggled with the bloodied shirt. "Let me," she said softly, using a pair of scissors to cut away the fabric, revealing a muscled torso marred by an angry wound along his left side. The bullet had carved a deep furrow through the flesh but hadn't lodged inside a blessing in disguise. "You're lucky," she told him, examining the wound carefully. "It passed through cleanly. Any deeper and—" She didn't finish the thought. "Not my first gunshot," Riley replied, his voice tight with pain. "Not likely to be my last in this line of work." Penelope worked methodically, drawing on skills she'd developed over years of tending her own injuries. She cleaned the wound thoroughly, using the whiskey as a disinfectant despite Riley's sharp intake of breath when the alcohol made contact with raw flesh. "I'm sorry," she murmured, working as gently as she could. "I know it burns." "Rather have the burning now than fever later," Riley replied, his jaw clenched. His eyes never left her face as she worked, and something in his steady gaze made her cheeks warm despite the gravity of the situation. As she applied a clean bandage, the door to the bedroom creaked open and Thomas stood there, eyes wide at the sight of blood. "Is Mr. Riley going to die?" he asked, his small voice trembling. "No, son," Riley answered before Penelope could, forcing a reassuring smile. "Just a scratch." "Your ma is patching me up good as new." Thomas approached cautiously, his expression solemn. "My papa hurt mama too. Are you a bad man like him?" Riley's expression softened. "No, Thomas, some bad men tried to rob me on the road. I'm a deputy marshal, remember? Sometimes my job is dangerous." Thomas considered this, then nodded seriously. "When I grow up, I'm going to be strong like you and protect Mama and Alina." "You already are strong," Riley told him. "It takes a special kind of strength to look after your family the way you do." The simple exchange brought tears to Penelope's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "Thomas, would you check on your sister? If she's awake, perhaps you could help her gather eggs from the henhouse for dinner." Once Thomas had left, Penelope finished bandaging Riley's wound. "You shouldn't have had to lie to him," she said quietly. Riley caught her hand as she withdrew it from the bandage. "I didn't lie, Penelope. I was ambushed by 2 men on the road from town. They took my money but fled when a wagon approached." He paused. "But you're right that I didn't tell the whole truth. Harold was asking questions all over town today, offering money for information about your whereabouts." Penelope's blood ran cold. "Did anyone know anything?" "No, but it's only a matter of time before someone remembers seeing me ride out in this direction yesterday." Riley winced as he tried to sit up. "We need to consider moving you and the children to somewhere safer." "You're in no condition to travel," Penelope protested. "And where would we go that Harold couldn't find us?" "I have a friend," Riley said after a moment's consideration. "Owns a ranch about 30 miles west of here near the mountains. Isolated. Harold wouldn't think to look there." 30 miles is a long journey with small children," Penelope said doubtfully, "and you're injured." "I'll heal," Riley insisted, "and the journey can wait a day or two, but we should prepare." He looked into her eyes, his expression grave. "I won't let him find you, Penelope, I give you my word." There was such certainty in his voice that Penelope found herself believing him, despite the impossible odds against them. "Rest now," she instructed, gently pushing him back against the pillows. "You've lost blood and need to regain your strength." As she turned to leave, Riley caught her hand again. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the care, and for not panicking when I arrived looking half dead." A small smile touched Penelope's lips. "I've had practice appearing calm when everything inside me is in turmoil." Understanding passed between them, a shared recognition of strength born from surviving life's hardships. Penelope gently withdrew her hand and left him to rest, her mind already turning to what preparations they would need to make for the journey ahead. That evening, after settling the children to bed, Penelope returned to Riley's room with a tray of broth and bread. He was awake, propped against the headboard, looking somewhat improved though still pale. "You should be sleeping," she admonished gently, setting the tray beside him. "Too much thinking to do," Riley replied. He accepted the broth gratefully, his hands steady despite his injury. "We need to leave tomorrow night." "So soon?" Penelope asked, alarmed. "But your wound will heal better on the move than with a bullet in my back," Riley interrupted grimly. Harold was offering $10 for information this morning. By tomorrow, that price will have doubled. Someone will talk eventually, money being scarce as it is around these parts. Penelope sank into the chair beside his bed. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't accepted your help, then you and your children would likely be dead or worse by now," Riley finished firmly. "Don't blame yourself for seeking safety, Penelope." She looked at him, truly looked at this man who had risked so much for strangers. "Why are you doing this, Riley, truly? You've already been shot. You could lose your position, your reputation, everything." Riley was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. "When I was 8 years old," he finally said, his voice low, "my mother ran from my father. He was like Harold, a drunk with fists quicker than his conscience. She took me and my sister and fled in the middle of the night." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. "What happened?" "He found us," Riley said simply. "A neighbor saw us leaving and told him which way we'd gone. There was no one to help us, no safe place to hide." His expression darkened with the memory. "He dragged us back home and made sure my mother understood the cost of trying to leave again." "I'm so sorry," Penelope whispered. "I swore then, as a boy watching my mother's spirit break, that if I ever had the chance to help someone escape that kind of life, I would." Riley's eyes met hers, burning with conviction despite his weakened state. "So you see, this isn't just about you, Penelope. It's about the boy I was, the man I've tried to become." In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared pain transformed into purpose. Penelope reached out impulsively and covered his hand with her own. "Thank you," she said, the simple words insufficient for the depth of her gratitude. Riley turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Riley spoke again. "We'll leave tomorrow night after dark. Travel is cooler then anyway, and we'll have less chance of being spotted." Penelope nodded, mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "I'll pack provisions and get the children ready without alarming them." "Pack light," Riley advised, "only essentials. My friend Jacob has a wife who can provide anything else you might need when we arrive." "And you're certain we'll be welcome?" Penelope asked hesitantly. A ghost of a smile touched Riley's lips. "Jacob owes me his life 3 times over, and his wife Maria has a soft spot for children. They'll welcome you." The plan set, Penelope reluctantly withdrew her hand and stood. "You should rest now. Tomorrow will be demanding." Riley nodded, already looking weary from their conversation. "Penelope," he called softly as she reached the door. "Thank you for tending to me today." "It was the least I could do," she replied. "Good night, Riley. Good night." The next day passed in a flurry of quiet preparations. Riley, moving stiffly but determinedly despite Penelope's protests, checked and maintained his weapons, packed essential supplies, and ensured his horses were ready for the journey. Penelope occupied the children with simple chores and stories, not wanting to alarm them with the rushed preparations. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a summer storm. Riley studied the sky with concern. "The rain might work in our favor," he observed as he joined Penelope on the porch. "We'll cover our tracks, make it harder for anyone to follow. But it'll make traveling with the little ones more difficult." "They're stronger than they look," Penelope assured him. "Thomas rode with his father since he was 3, and Alina has never complained, no matter how uncomfortable the journey." Riley's expression darkened at the mention of Harold. "Children shouldn't have to be that resilient." "No," Penelope agreed softly, "they shouldn't." As twilight approached, the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. Penelope had just finished serving a simple dinner when Scout's sudden barking alerted them to an approaching rider. Riley was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to his holster despite the pain the sudden movement caused. "Take the children to the cellar," he ordered quietly. Now, Penelope didn't hesitate, gathering Alina in her arms and taking Thomas's hand. "Remember what we practiced this afternoon," she whispered to her son. "Quiet as mice." As Riley moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains, Penelope hurried the children through the kitchen and out the back door. The root cellar was well hidden, just as Riley had described, its entrance a sturdy trapdoor concealed beneath the spreading branches of an apple tree. Thomas helped her lift the heavy door, and they descended into the cool darkness below. Penelope settled the children on a pallet in the corner farthest from the entrance, covering them with a blanket despite the summer heat. "We must be very quiet," she whispered, stroking Alina's hair as the little girl trembled against her. "Like a game of hide and seek. Is it, Papa?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. Penelope hesitated, unwilling to lie but not wanting to increase their fear. "I don't know, sweetheart, but Mr. Riley will keep us safe." Above them, they could hear muffled voices, Riley's deep tones and another man's higher pitch. There was no shouting, no sounds of confrontation, which Penelope took as a positive sign. Still, she held her breath, straining to hear any indication of what was happening. Long minutes passed. Alina fell into an exhausted sleep against Penelope's shoulder, but Thomas remained alert, his small body tense with readiness. Finally, footsteps approached the cellar and the trapdoor lifted, revealing Riley's silhouette against the darkening sky. "It's safe," he called softly. "Just a neighbor checking on me after hearing about the ambush." Relief flooded through Penelope as she gathered Alina and climbed the rough-hewn steps, Thomas close behind her. The air outside felt suddenly sweeter after the close confines of the cellar. What did they want? She asked as they walked back to the house, the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall. "Old man Jenkins from the next property over," Riley explained. "Town's buzzing with news of my run-in with bandits. He was concerned when he didn't see smoke from my chimney today." A grim smile touched his lips. "Also mentioned that there's a man in town offering good money for information about a woman and 2 children. Penelope clutched Alina tighter. "Did he suspect anything?" "No, Jenkins is half blind and wholly uninterested in other people's business. I told him I was planning to visit my sister in San Antonio for a spell to recover, and he seemed satisfied." Riley's expression grew serious. "But his visit confirms we need to leave tonight as planned. Once word spreads that I'm away, my property becomes an obvious place to search." As if emphasizing the urgency, lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a crash of thunder that made Alina stir and whimper in her sleep. The rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the roof as they entered the house. "The storm will make travel difficult," Penelope observed worriedly. "It will also wash away our tracks," Riley countered. "And most men, even those motivated by money or vengeance, prefer shelter to pursuit on a night like this." They finished their preparations in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As the clock struck 9, Riley declared it time to depart. The rain had settled into a steady downpour, and the night was dark as pitch between lightning flashes. Riley had prepared 2 horses, his own sturdy chestnut stallion, and a gentle mare that Penelope would ride with Alina. Thomas would ride with Riley, an arrangement the boy seemed pleased with despite the circumstances. "Remember, we ride west," Riley instructed as they mounted up, rain already soaking through their clothes despite the oilskin ponchos he had provided. "Stay close, and if anything happens, if we get separated, continue west until you reach the foothills." The Hawkins Ranch is marked by 3 tall pines standing together near the road. Penelope nodded, settling Alina securely before her in the saddle. The little girl was bundled in blankets, protected somewhat from the worst of the rain, but Penelope worried about the journey ahead. "Ready?" Riley asked, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Ready," Penelope confirmed, though her heart raced with fear and uncertainty. They set off into the stormy night, leaving behind the sanctuary that had briefly sheltered them. Riley led the way, Thomas seated before him, the boy's small frame dwarfed by the deputy's protective embrace. Penelope followed closely, one arm securely around Alina, the other handling the reins with growing confidence. The first hour passed without incident, the horses picking their way carefully along muddy trails illuminated sporadically by lightning. The rain eventually slackened to a drizzle, though distant thunder suggested the storm wasn't finished with them yet. They stopped briefly at a creek to water the horses and allow the children a moment's rest. Thomas, despite the lateness of the hour and the difficult conditions, remained alert and curious, asking Riley quiet questions about the stars now peeking through breaks in the clouds. Alina, however, was fretful, unused to such prolonged discomfort. Penelope did her best to soothe her, singing softly as they continued their journey, the familiar lullaby seeming incongruously gentle against the wild backdrop of the Texas night. It was past midnight when Riley suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Penelope reined in beside him, instantly alert. "What is it?" she whispered. Riley gestured toward a distant point where the faintest glow of firelight could be seen through the trees. "Campfire," he murmured. "Could be travelers, could be trouble. We'll detour north to avoid them." They turned off the main trail, moving deeper into the brush. The going was slower here, the ground uneven and the path narrower. Branches heavy with rainwater brushed against them, adding to their already soaked condition. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn when disaster struck. A rabbit darted across their path, startling Penelope's mare. The horse reared suddenly, and despite Penelope's efforts to control her, Alina's frightened cry only increased the animal's panic. Riley turned back immediately, but before he could reach them, the mare bolted, carrying Penelope and Alina into the brush at a dangerous pace. Penelope clung desperately to both the child and the saddle, branches whipping at her face as they crashed through the undergrowth. A low-hanging branch caught her shoulder, nearly unseating her, but Penelope gritted her teeth against the pain and focused on keeping Alina secure. The mare finally slowed, sides heaving in a small clearing. Penelope's heart hammered in her chest as she soothed the frightened animal, murmuring reassurances to both horse and child. Alina was crying softly, more scared than hurt, while Penelope assessed their situation with growing alarm. The dawn light revealed unfamiliar surroundings with no sign of Riley and Thomas. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered to Alina, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "Mr. Riley will find us." As if summoned by her faith, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them moments later. Riley appeared at the edge of the clearing, Thomas still securely before him, relief evident on his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, dismounting and approaching them. "Just shaken," Penelope assured him, accepting his help to dismount while still holding Alina. The mare was spooked. Riley checked them both quickly, his hands gentle but thorough as he assessed for injuries. Satisfied they were unharmed, he turned to examine the horse. "She seems calm now," he observed, "but we should lead her for a while to be safe." The incident had cost them valuable time, and the growing light made travel more risky. Riley scanned their surroundings, making a quick decision. "There's an abandoned line shack about a mile from here," he said, "used by cowboys during roundups but empty this time of year. We can rest there through the day and continue our journey tonight." Penelope nodded, too exhausted to argue. They proceeded cautiously, Riley leading Penelope's mare while she walked beside him, Alina now calmer but still clinging tightly to her mother. The line shack proved to be little more than a one-room shelter with a sagging roof and dirt floor, but after their night in the open, it seemed a palace. Riley secured the horses in the small lean-to attached to the back, while Penelope settled the children on a relatively clean patch of floor, wrapping them in the damp blankets they'd brought. "Try to sleep," she encouraged them. "We're safe here." Thomas nodded solemnly, his eyelids already drooping despite his determination to stay alert. Alina, exhausted from fear and the long night, was asleep almost instantly. When Riley returned, Penelope was still sitting beside her children, her own exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "You should rest too," he said quietly, easing himself down beside her with a barely suppressed wince. The night's exertions had clearly taken a toll on his healing wound. "Your injury," Penelope said with concern. "Let me check the bandage." Riley started to protest, but relented when she fixed him with a determined look. He unbuttoned his shirt enough to reveal the bandage, now soiled with rain and sweat. Penelope carefully peeled it back, relieved to find the wound looked clean despite the difficult journey. "It's healing well," she told him, applying a fresh bandage from the small medical kit they'd brought. "But you shouldn't be pushing yourself so hard." "No choice," Riley replied simply. He caught her hand as she finished, his calloused fingers warm against her skin despite the night's chill. "You were brave back there, Penelope. Not many women could have kept their seat with a spooked horse and a child to protect." Warmth spread through Penelope at his praise, along with something deeper, a fluttering in her chest she hadn't felt in years. "I've had practice staying calm in frightening situations," she said softly. Riley's expression darkened. "Harold," Penelope nodded, looking away. "It became a necessary skill." Riley's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "You won't need those skills anymore, not like that." The simple promise, spoken with such quiet certainty, brought unexpected tears to Penelope's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, not wanting Riley to think her weak. "Rest," he urged again, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I'll keep watch." Penelope wanted to protest Riley needed rest more than she did, but exhaustion overwhelmed her arguments. She settled beside her children, one arm protectively around Alina, and despite her intention to remain vigilant, sleep claimed her almost immediately. She dreamed of running, endless running, Harold's voice calling her name in that terrible, sweetly reasonable tone he used just before his rage exploded. But then the dream shifted, and it was Riley's voice she heard, deep and steady, promising safety. When Penelope woke, the angle of sunlight through the shack's single grimy window suggested it was late afternoon. The children were no longer beside her, and for a moment, panic seized her before she heard Thomas's quiet laughter from outside. Rising stiffly, Penelope made her way to the door. Riley sat on a fallen log outside, Thomas beside him, demonstrating how to whittle a simple whistle from a piece of branch. Alina sat at Riley's feet, carefully arranging wildflowers in the folds of her dress. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that Penelope's heart constricted with a sudden, fierce longing. This was what childhood should be: safe, instructive, filled with small joys, not the constant fear and walking on eggshells that had defined her children's lives thus far. As if sensing her presence, Riley looked up, a smile warming his features. "The sleeping beauty awakens," he said lightly. "Feel better?" "Much," Penelope admitted, stepping out into the late afternoon sunshine. "Though I didn't mean to sleep so long, you should have woken me." "You needed the rest," Riley replied, then turned back to Thomas. "Now remember, boy, always cut away from yourself, never toward." Thomas nodded seriously, his small face a study in concentration as he mimicked Riley's movements with the small knife he'd been entrusted with. "Mama." Alina noticed her then, jumping up and running to Penelope with her collection of flowers. "Look what I found. Mr. Riley says they're called bluebonnets." "They're beautiful, sweetheart," Penelope said, kneeling to admire the delicate blooms. "Did you thank Mr. Riley for watching you while I slept?" Alina nodded solemnly. "He showed us animal tracks and taught us bird calls, and he caught a rabbit but let it go because it had babies to feed." Penelope glanced at Riley, who shrugged modestly. Seemed like a good opportunity for a nature lesson. There it was again, that flutter in her chest, that warmth that spread through her when he spoke. Penelope tried to dismiss it as simple gratitude, but a deeper part of her recognized it for what it was. The first stirrings of feelings she'd thought long dead. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they prepared to continue their journey. The children, refreshed by the day's rest and Riley's attentive care, seemed to approach the coming night's travel with something almost like excitement. "How much further?" Thomas asked as Riley helped him mount the chestnut stallion. "If we make good time, we should reach the Hawkins Ranch before midnight." Riley replied, checking the saddle's cinch one final time before lifting Penelope onto the mare. Their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, and when Penelope met Riley's gaze, she saw her own confused emotions reflected there. But now was not the time for such consideration. Survival remained their priority. The evening's travel proved easier than the previous nights. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky brilliant with stars and a waxing moon that provided ample light for their journey. The horses, rested and fed, moved at a steady pace along the trail Riley chose. They stopped only once, at a small stream, to water the horses and allow the children a brief rest. As they prepared to mount up again, Riley suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his holster. "What is it?" Penelope whispered, instantly alert. Riley motioned for silence, his head tilted as he listened intently. After a moment, he relaxed slightly. "Thought I heard something, probably just wildlife." But Penelope noticed he remained vigilant as they continued, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, his body positioned protectively between her and any potential threat. The moon was high overhead when Riley finally pointed to a distant light. "There," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The Hawkins Ranch." As they drew closer, Penelope could make out a substantial homestead larger than Riley's modest ranch, with a main house, several outbuildings, and corrals. A single lamp burned in a downstairs window, as if left to guide travelers home. They were still 100 yards from the main house when the sharp report of a rifle split the night. Riley reacted instantly, throwing himself from his mount and pulling Thomas down with him in one fluid motion. "Get down!" he shouted to Penelope, who was already sliding from her saddle, clutching Alina tightly. "That's far enough," a voice called from the darkness. "State your business or the next shot won't be a warning, Jacob," Riley called back, keeping Thomas safely behind him. "It's Riley Kendrick." A moment of silence followed before a lantern appeared, illuminating a tall figure approaching cautiously, rifle still at the ready. As he drew closer, the light revealed a man about Riley's age with a weathered face and watchful eyes that softened with recognition. Riley. Jacob Hawkins lowered his rifle, surprise evident in his expression. "What in tarnation are you doing out here at this hour?" His gaze shifted to Penelope and the children, curiosity replacing wariness, and with company no less. "It's a long story, old friend," Riley replied, the tension leaving his shoulders. "One best told inside if you're willing to extend your hospitality." Jacob studied them for a moment longer before nodding decisively. "Any friend of Riley's is welcome at my table." "Come on, Maria will have my hide for shooting at guests, but she'll have hot coffee and food waiting once she's done scolding me." The welcome at the Hawkins Ranch proved as warm as Riley had promised. Maria, a handsome woman with kind eyes and capable hands, fussed over the children immediately, providing warm milk and sweet bread despite the late hour. Jacob listened gravely as Riley explained their situation, his expression darkening at the mention of Harold Ward. "I've heard of him," Jacob acknowledged. "Nasty reputation even by frontier standards." He glanced at Penelope with newfound respect. "Takes courage to leave a man like that, madam." "Call me Penelope, please," she replied softly, and it wasn't courage so much as desperation. "Sometimes they're one and the same," Maria observed wisely, setting a fresh cup of coffee before Penelope. "The spare rooms are ready. You and the children must be exhausted." Indeed, Alina had already fallen asleep in Penelope's lap, and Thomas was fighting a losing battle with his heavy eyelids. With Maria's help, Penelope settled the children in a comfortable bedroom with 2 small beds. They barely stirred as she removed their shoes and tucked blankets around them. "They're beautiful children," Maria commented as they slipped from the room. "The boy has your eyes." "Thank you," Penelope replied, warmed by the simple observation. "They've endured more than children should have to." "But they have a mother who loves them enough to risk everything," Maria said, her gaze knowing. "That counts for much in this world." She hesitated, then added, "And they seem to have found a protector in Riley as well." Penelope felt color rise in her cheeks. "He's been very kind." Maria's smile suggested she understood more than Penelope had said. Riley Kendrick is a good man, one of the best. Now, come. The men are still talking, and you should eat something before you collapse from exhaustion yourself. In the main room, Riley and Jacob were deep in conversation, their heads bent close together over the table. They looked up as the women entered, and Riley immediately rose to pull out a chair for Penelope. The simple courtesy, so different from Harold's demanding expectations, touched her deeply. "The children are settled?" he asked. Penelope nodded. "Sound asleep. They feel safe here." "They are safe," Jacob assured her firmly. "My ranch hands are loyal, and we're remote enough that visitors are rare. If this Harold comes looking, he won't find you easily." "And if he does," Riley added grimly, "he'll find more than he bargained for." The conversation turned to practicalities: how long Penelope and the children might stay, what arrangements could be made for their future, whether legal steps could be taken to protect them from Harold's claims. Through it all, Penelope found herself watching Riley, noting the respect with which Jacob treated him, the easy competence with which he addressed each concern. By the time Maria insisted they all retire for the night, plans had been laid for the immediate future. Penelope would remain at the Hawkins Ranch with the children while Riley returned to Alpine to gather intelligence and, if possible, resolve the situation with Harold legally. The thought of Riley leaving, of facing even a few days without his reassuring presence, filled Penelope with unexpected dread. As Maria showed her to her room, a comfortable chamber adjacent to the children's, Penelope found herself wondering when this man had become so important to her peace of mind. Sleep proved elusive despite her exhaustion. Penelope lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch house settling, her mind racing with uncertainties. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called softly, sitting up. "Riley," came the quiet response. "May I speak with you a moment?" Penelope quickly donned the robe Maria had provided and opened the door. Riley stood in the hallway, still fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, alarmed. Riley shook his head. "No, nothing new, I just—" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair in an uncharacteristically uncertain gesture. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable, that you feel safe here." "I do," Penelope assured him. "The Hawkins have been very kind." Riley nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." He shifted his weight as if preparing to leave, then paused. "Penelope, about tomorrow, I need to return to Alpine." "I know," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "You explained earlier, it makes sense for you to go back to avoid suspicion and to gather information." "I don't like leaving you and the children," Riley admitted, his voice low. "But Jacob and Maria will keep you safe, and I can do more to resolve this situation in town than hiding out here." "How long will you be gone?" Penelope asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. Something flickered in Riley's eyes, a warmth, a promise. "No more than 3 days, 4 at most, just long enough to assess the situation and set some plans in motion." He took a step closer, close enough that Penelope could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I give you my word, I will come back." The intensity in his voice made Penelope's heart race. "I know you will," she whispered. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Riley reached out slowly, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "You're an extraordinary woman, Penelope Ward, brave in ways most men could never understand." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, chaste, respectful, yet somehow more intimate than any touch she had experienced in years. "Sleep well," he murmured, stepping back. "I'll see you at breakfast before I leave." As he disappeared down the hallway, Penelope touched her fingertips to the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the future held more promise than fear. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Riley prepared for his journey back to Alpine. He and Jacob spent time in the barn, voices occasionally rising in what sounded like disagreement before settling again. When they emerged, Jacob appeared resigned and Riley determined. Penelope occupied herself helping Maria with breakfast, grateful for the distraction of domestic tasks. The children, refreshed after a night of undisturbed sleep, explored the ranch house with cautious curiosity, Thomas particularly fascinated by Jacob's collection of books and maps. As they gathered for the meal, Riley explained his plan. "I'll tell folks I was visiting my friend Jacob after the ambush, which is true enough. No one needs to know about you and the children being here." "And if Harold questions you directly?" Penelope asked, unable to keep worry from her voice. "I'll say I helped a woman and children to the stage station as you suggested," Riley replied. "That I believe they were heading to San Antonio. It's a plausible story, and by the time he thinks to verify it, we'll have made more permanent arrangements." These permanent arrangements remained vague, a fact that both relieved and troubled Penelope. While she appreciated Riley's dedication to their safety, she was acutely aware that they could not hide forever. Eventually, decisions about their future would need to be made. After breakfast, the moment of departure arrived all too quickly. Riley checked his saddlebags one final time while Penelope and the children gathered on the porch to see him off. "Remember what I told you about fishing?" Riley asked Thomas. Kneeling to the boy's level, Thomas nodded seriously. "Be patient and quiet or you'll scare the fish away." "That's right," Riley confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "You mind your mother and the Hawkins while I'm gone, you hear?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied. "Will you be back soon?" "Before you know it," Riley promised, then turned to Alina, who was watching him with solemn eyes. "And you, little lady, what did I show you yesterday?" Alina's face brightened. "How to make a daisy chain. That's right. Perhaps you can make one for your mama while I'm away." Riley's gaze shifted to Penelope, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. To remind her that beauty can be found even in difficult times. The simple sentiment, spoken with such sincerity, brought unexpected tears to Penelope's eyes. "We'll be fine," she assured him, though the words were as much for herself as for him. "Just be careful, Riley." Riley straightened, towering over her once more. "I will," he promised. Then, with a formality that didn't quite mask the emotion beneath, he took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips. "Until I return." The days of Riley's absence passed both too slowly and too quickly for Penelope. The Hawkins Ranch provided a peaceful refuge, unlike anything she had experienced since her marriage to Harold. Maria proved to be not only a gracious hostess but a sympathetic friend, sharing stories of her own difficult early years on the frontier while teaching Penelope the particular skills needed for ranch life. Jacob, initially more reserved, warmed to Penelope and the children as the days progressed. He took Thomas under his wing, showing him the operations of the ranch with patient explanations, while treating Alina with a grandfatherly tenderness that delighted the little girl. By the third day, Penelope found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life, her hands busy with meaningful work, her mind gradually releasing the constant vigilance that had been her companion for so long. The children, too, blossomed in this environment of safety and gentle guidance. Thomas grew more talkative, asking endless questions about everything from cattle breeding to star navigation, while Alina's nightmares subsided, replaced by peaceful sleep and daytime laughter. Yet beneath this growing contentment ran an undercurrent of uncertainty. What would happen when Riley returned? What permanent arrangements might be possible? And always, the shadow of Harold lurked at the edges of her thoughts, a reminder that their peace remained precarious. On the afternoon of the fourth day, as Penelope helped Maria preserve peaches from the small orchard, these questions surfaced once more. "Have you thought about what you'll do next?" Maria asked gently, handing Penelope another peach to slice. "After this immediate danger passes." Penelope's hands stilled momentarily. "I'm not sure such a time will come," she admitted. "Harold is persistent, and the law favors husbands in these matters." Maria's expression was knowing. "The law isn't everything out here on the frontier, Penelope. And there are ways to start anew that don't require legal permission." "You mean running further," Penelope said, resuming her work. "California, perhaps, or even Oregon territory." That's one option, Maria agreed, though not the only one. She hesitated, then added carefully, Riley cares for you and the children more than he perhaps realizes himself. Warmth flooded Penelope's cheeks. He's been kind, certainly. Maria's laugh was soft but knowing. Oh, my dear. Riley Kendrick hasn't ridden 30 miles with bullet wound for kindness' sake alone. She patted Penelope's hand. I've known that man since he was a gangly deputy fresh from San Antonio. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Before Penelope could formulate a response, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Maria moved to the window, her expression shifting from curiosity to pleasure. Speaking of the devil, she said with a smile, Riley's back. Penelope's heart leapt at the words, a reaction too powerful to be mere relief at his safe return. She wiped her hands quickly on her apron, suddenly conscious of her appearance in a way she hadn't been moments before. Maria's knowing smile suggested she missed nothing of Penelope's reaction. Go on, she urged. I'll finish here. Penelope needed no further encouragement. She hurried from the kitchen just as Riley dismounted in the yard, Thomas already racing toward him with unbridled enthusiasm. Riley caught the boy in a one-armed hug, his face lighting with genuine pleasure at the child's welcome. When he looked up and saw Penelope standing on the porch, something in his expression made her breath catch. It was more than relief, more than friendly affection. It was a look of coming home. Penelope, he greeted her, his voice warm as he approached with Thomas still chattering excitedly beside him. Everything well here, very well, she assured him, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. And in town, did you learn anything useful? Riley glanced down at Thomas, then back to Penelope with a slight shake of his head, a clear message that some things were better discussed away from young ears. Nothing that can't wait until after I've washed off the trail dust, he said lightly. Is that peach preserves I smell? The evening meal was a cheerful affair, with Riley sharing carefully edited stories of his time in Alpine that delighted the children without revealing anything of concern. Jacob and Maria contributed their own tales, and for a brief time the weight of their situation seemed to lift, replaced by the simple pleasure of shared food and companionship. It was only later, after the children had been tucked into bed and Jacob and Maria had tactfully retired early, that Riley and Penelope found themselves alone on the porch, the night air cool after the heat of the day. Tell me what you learned, Penelope said without preamble, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Riley settled into the chair beside her with a sigh that spoke of bone-deep weariness. Harold's still in Alpine, still asking questions. He's hired 2 men not local to help with the search. Penelope's blood ran cold. The same men who ambushed you? No, Riley assured her. Those 2 are currently enjoying the hospitality of the territorial jail in El Paso, courtesy of information I provided to the sheriff there. A grim smile touched his lips. Turns out they were wanted for stage robbery near Fort Stockton. So Harold doesn't know we're here, Penelope pressed. No, but he's expanding his search, checking all the outlying ranches and homesteads. Riley's expression grew serious. It won't be long before someone mentions my friendship with Jacob. Harold's offering serious money now, $50 for information leading to your whereabouts. $50, Penelope whispered, understanding the implications. In a frontier economy where many survived on less than $1 a day, such a sum represented an almost irresistible temptation. What do we do? Riley was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the first stars were appearing. I've been considering our options, he finally said. None of them are perfect, but there's one that might offer the best chance for a clean break. What is it? San Francisco, Riley said simply. I have a friend there, a former ranger who now works for Wells Fargo. He could help you establish a new identity, find work, get the children into school. California, Penelope murmured, trying to imagine starting over in a place so distant, so unknown. But how would we get there? Harold would surely check the stage routes, the railways. There's a cattle drive leaving from Jacob's western range next week, Riley explained. Heading for the railhead at Dodge City. From there, you could take the train west not directly but in stages, changing your appearance and names at each stop. The plan was logical, well considered, and filled Penelope with an inexplicable sense of loss. "You've thought this through carefully," she observed quietly. Riley nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Your safety and the children's has to be the priority. And you." The question escaped before Penelope could consider its implications. "What will you do after? After we're gone?" Now Riley did look at her, his expression a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't fully decipher. "I have responsibilities here. My position as deputy my ranch." He trailed off, then added softly, "But I would make sure you were established safely before returning." "I see," Penelope said, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. What had she expected? That this man who had already risked so much would abandon his life to accompany them? It was foolish, irrational, and yet the thought of continuing without him felt suddenly, terribly wrong. Riley must have seen something of her thoughts in her expression, for he reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "Penelope, I..." He hesitated, seeming to struggle with words. "There's another option, one I've been afraid to suggest." Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest, fragile and uncertain. "What option?" "You could stay," Riley said, his voice low but clear in the quiet night. "Not here at Jacob's, but with me." "At my ranch." He took a deep breath. "As my wife." The world seemed to still around them as Penelope absorbed his words. "Your wife," she repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know it's sudden," Riley continued, words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "And perhaps improper to suggest when you're still legally bound to Harold. But there are judges in Texas who understand special circumstances. We could petition for a divorce on grounds of cruelty, and with my testimony as a law officer..." "Riley," Penelope interrupted gently, turning her hand beneath his so their fingers intertwined. "Are you proposing marriage as a solution to our problem, or because you..." She couldn't finish the question. Riley's expression softened, all pretense of practical concerns falling away. "Because I've come to care for you, Penelope, more than I thought possible in so short a time, and for the children as well." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I know it's fast, and I would understand if you need time, or if you prefer the San Francisco plan. I just wanted you to know there's a place for you here if you want it." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of a joy so unexpected she scarcely knew how to contain it. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "In ways I had forgotten were possible." Riley's smile transformed his face. Years of care seemed to fall away in an instant. "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope evident in every line of his body. "It's I need to think about what's best for my children," Penelope replied honestly, "but my heart is already saying yes." The happiness in Riley's eyes was answer enough. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet profound, a promise, a beginning, a healing of old wounds neither had believed could ever truly mend. When they finally parted, Penelope rested her forehead against Riley's, a sense of peace settling over her that she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Whatever we decide," she whispered, "thank you for showing me that not all men are like Harold, that love can be kind as well as passionate." "Love," Riley repeated softly, the word hanging between them like a revelation. "Yes, I suppose that's what this is." The decision, when it came, felt inevitable, not a choice made in haste or fear, but the natural conclusion to the journey they had begun that dusty afternoon when Riley first found Penelope and her children hiding beneath the overturned wagon. They would stay in Texas, fight for Penelope's legal freedom, build a life together at Riley's ranch. It would not be easy. Harold's rage would not diminish with time, and the law's protection was uncertain at best, but together, they stood a chance that neither possessed alone. Jacob, when informed of their decision, nodded approvingly. "Suspected as much when Riley first asked for my help," he admitted. "That man never did anything halfway." Maria was more openly delighted, embracing Penelope with tears in her eyes. "You both deserve happiness," she declared firmly. And those children deserve a father who will love them properly. The children themselves received the news with reactions that spoke volumes about their past experiences. Thomas, wary at first, peppered Riley with practical questions. Would they live at his ranch? Could he still have his own room? Would Scout be coming too? Riley answered each inquiry with patient seriousness, understanding the boy's need for certainty in a world that had proven dangerously unpredictable. By the end of the conversation, Thomas's cautious acceptance had evolved into genuine enthusiasm, especially when Riley promised to teach him to ride his own horse. Eleanor, simpler in her needs, had one question only. Will you read me stories at bedtime like you did at your house? Riley's voice grew suspiciously husky as he assured her that bedtime stories would be a nightly occurrence for as long as she wanted them. With the decision made, plans proceeded rapidly. Riley rode to the neighboring ranch where the cattle drive was being organized, securing promises of help from men he trusted. Jacob dispatched a ranch hand to El Paso with a letter for a judge known to be sympathetic to cases like Penelope's. Maria altered clothes for the children and helped Penelope prepare for the days ahead. Throughout these preparations, Harold's shadow loomed. Reports from Alpine confirmed he was still searching, his rage growing with each passing day. The hired men were making inquiries at every ranch and homestead within 50 miles, and the price for information had risen to $75 a fortune in frontier terms. It's time, Riley announced on the 6th day, returning from a scouting trip with a grim expression. Harold's men were at the Wilson place yesterday, not 10 miles from here. We need to move now. Their plan was bold in its simplicity. Rather than hiding or fleeing further, they would return directly to Alpine, to the territorial judge who had arrived for the monthly court session. With Riley's testimony as a deputy marshal, along with documentation of Harold's violent history provided by the town doctor who had treated Penelope's injuries in secret over the years, they would petition for an emergency divorce and protective order. It's risky, Riley acknowledged as they made final preparations. But hiding indefinitely isn't a solution, and running to California means starting over without resources or protection. This way, if we succeed, you'll be legally free. And if we fail? Penelope asked quietly, the children safely out of earshot. Riley's expression hardened. We won't, he said simply. But if the legal approach fails, we still have the cattle drive option as a backup plan. They departed at dawn the following morning, not on horseback as they had arrived, but in Jacob's sturdy wagon with a canvas cover that concealed its occupants from casual observation. Jacob himself drove, with Riley riding alongside as armed escort. Penelope and the children rode within, along with Maria, whose presence was both practical support and social protection. A respectable married woman accompanying a young mother added legitimacy to their party. The journey to Alpine was tense, but uneventful. They avoided the main roads, taking less traveled paths that added hours to their journey but reduced the risk of encountering Harold or his hired men. The children, sensing the gravity of the situation, remained unusually quiet, Thomas keeping Eleanor entertained with whispered stories and simple games. They reached Alpine as the sun was setting, the town's buildings silhouetted against the darkening sky. Rather than entering directly, they circled to approach from the east, avoiding the main street where Harold might be watching. Their destination was not the sheriff's office or the small courthouse, but the home of Judge Emmett Sullivan, whose reputation for both fairness and discretion had made him Riley's choice for their petition. The judge's house stood on a quiet side street, its well-maintained appearance speaking of modest prosperity. A single lamp burned in the front window as Jacob drew the wagon to a halt in the small backyard, shielded from street view by a stand of cottonwoods. "Wait here," Riley instructed, dismounting. "I'll speak to Sullivan first, make sure it's safe." The minutes of his absence stretched interminably for Penelope, her mind conjuring every possible disaster. What if Harold had somehow anticipated their plan? What if the judge refused to see them? What if legal constraints made their petition impossible? Her spiraling fears were interrupted by Riley's return, his expression cautiously optimistic. "The judge will see us," he reported. "He's clearing his study now. Jacob, if you'll stand watch out here with Maria and the children, I'll take Penelope inside." Judge Sullivan proved to be an elderly man with shrewd eyes and a bearing that commanded respect despite his stooped shoulders and white hair. He listened without interruption as Riley presented their case, his gaze occasionally shifting to Penelope, assessing without judgment. When Riley finished speaking, the judge remained silent for several moments, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "What you're asking isn't simple," he finally said. "A husband's rights are well established in law, so are a wife's rights to safety and protection," Riley countered respectfully. "Surely those must count for something." "Indeed they do, Deputy Kendrick." The judge turned to Penelope. "Mrs. Ward, I must ask you directly. Are you seeking this divorce and protection order of your own free will without coercion or undue influence?" "I am, Your Honor," Penelope replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I fear for my life and the welfare of my children if I remain in my husband's power." Judge Sullivan nodded slowly. "And you understand that even with my ruling, Mr. Ward may contest this action, that the territorial courts may ultimately side with him." "I understand the risks," Penelope confirmed, "but I cannot continue as before, for my children's sake if not my own." Something in her words seemed to resonate with the judge. He rose from his desk with sudden decision. "Very well. I will hear your petition formally tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in my chambers. Bring the doctor you mentioned. His testimony will be crucial. In the meantime—" He hesitated, glancing at Riley. It would be best if Mrs. Ward and her children remained somewhere safe and unknown to her husband. "I've arranged secure lodging," Riley assured him, not specifying details. The judge's knowing look suggested he understood the arrangement likely involved Riley's direct protection, but he made no comment on the propriety of such an arrangement. "Then I will see you both at 8. Good evening." As they left the judge's home through the back entrance, Penelope felt a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. They had taken the first step toward legal freedom, but the most dangerous part of their plan still lay ahead. Riley had indeed arranged secure lodging not at his own ranch, which would be too obvious a location, nor at the town's small hotel where questions might be asked. Instead, they traveled to the modest home of Dr. Samuel Whitman, the physician who had treated Penelope's injuries over the years and agreed to testify on her behalf. The doctor's wife, a kind-faced woman who introduced herself simply as Ruth, welcomed them with quiet efficiency, showing Penelope and the children to a small but comfortable bedroom at the rear of the house. The room had its own entrance, Riley explained, allowing them to leave quickly if necessary. "I'll be right outside all night," he promised as Penelope settled the exhausted children. "Jacob and Maria are returning to the ranch to maintain appearances, but they'll be back for the hearing tomorrow." Penelope caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Thank you," she whispered, the simple words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude, "for everything." Riley's smile was tender as he gently squeezed her fingers. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging, but you won't face it alone." Sleep came fitfully for Penelope that night, her mind too full of what the morning might bring. Each creak of the house, each distant sound from the town beyond, brought her to alert watchfulness. Yet beneath the anxiety ran a current of determination stronger than anything she had felt before. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would not return to Harold. That life was over one way or another. Dawn broke clear and cool, the October air carrying the first hint of the winter to come. Ruth brought a simple breakfast and helped Penelope prepare for the hearing, providing a clean, modest dress that would present the appropriate image to the judge. "Samuel has known Judge Sullivan for 20 years, Ruth confided as she pinned Penelope's hair into a neat arrangement. "He's a fair man, despite his sometimes gruff manner. If anyone will help you, he will." At precisely 7:30, Riley arrived to escort them to the courthouse. He had shaved and wore his deputy's uniform, the silver badge gleaming against the dark fabric. The formal attire emphasized the official nature of his involvement, not merely a concerned friend, but a representative of the law. Thomas and Alina, dressed in the cleanest clothes they possessed, regarded the proceedings with solemn eyes. Penelope had explained in simple terms appropriate to their ages what would happen today. They would speak to an important judge who might help ensure they wouldn't have to see their father again. Will Papa be there? Thomas had asked, his voice carefully neutral in the way Penelope had come to recognize as fear. I don't know, sweetheart, she had answered honestly. But if he is, Mr. Riley and the judge will make sure he can't hurt us. Now, as they walked the short distance to the courthouse, Penelope kept the children close, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of Harold. The town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their establishments, a few early risers heading to the cafe for breakfast. No one paid particular attention to their small party as Riley led them not to the main courthouse entrance, but to a side door that opened directly to the judge's chambers. Dr. Whitman was already waiting when they arrived, his medical bag at his feet, his expression grim but determined. He greeted Penelope with gentle respect, taking a moment to speak kindly to the children before turning to Riley. No sign of Ward yet, he reported quietly. But word spreads fast in Alpine. If he's in town, he'll hear about this sooner rather than later. Riley nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on the revolver at his hip. Let's hope the judge acts quickly then. Judge Sullivan arrived precisely at 8, acknowledging them with a brisk nod as he settled behind his desk. The hearing proceeded with surprising efficiency. Dr. Whitman presented his testimony first, detailing the injuries he had treated over the years: broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, countless bruises and contusions, all consistent with ongoing physical abuse. Riley followed, describing his official interactions with Harold Ward, the arrests for drunken violence, the complaints from townspeople, the reputation for uncontrolled rage that had made Ward a concern to local law enforcement long before Penelope's flight. Finally, Penelope herself spoke, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the years of abuse, the isolation, the threats against the children that had finally driven her to flee. Throughout her testimony, she held her head high, determined that the judge should see not a broken victim but a woman fighting for her children and her future. When the testimonies concluded, Judge Sullivan asked a few pointed questions, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. At last, he set down his pen and regarded Penelope directly. Mrs. Ward, the evidence you and your witnesses have presented is compelling. I am prepared to grant both your petition for divorce and the protective order prohibiting your husband from approaching or contacting you or your children. He paused, his expression grave. However, I must caution you that this ruling applies only within this judicial district. Should you travel elsewhere, or should Mr. Ward challenge this ruling in a higher court, the outcome might differ. I understand, Your Honor, Penelope replied, relief and caution warring within her. Thank you for your consideration. The judge nodded, then turned to Riley. Deputy Kendrick, given your testimony and obvious interest in this case, I am temporarily relieving you of any official duties related to Harold Ward. Sheriff Michaels will handle any interactions with him regarding this ruling. Riley accepted this restriction without protest, understanding the legal necessity of separating his professional role from his personal involvement. As Judge Sullivan began preparing the official documents, a commotion in the outer corridor drew everyone's attention. Raised voices, heavy footsteps, the sound of something or someone being forcibly restrained. Papa, Alina whispered, shrinking against Penelope's side. Riley moved immediately to position himself between the door and Penelope and the children, his hand on his holster. Doctor. Whitman stepped forward as well, creating an additional barrier of protection. The door burst open, revealing Harold Ward struggling against the restraining grip of Sheriff Michaels and his deputy. Harold's face was contorted with rage, his eyes bloodshot from drinking, his usually neat appearance disheveled from his efforts to break free. Penny, he roared, spotting her behind Riley's protective form. What the hell do you think you're doing? Judge Sullivan rose from his desk, his voice cutting through the chaos with authority. "Mr. Ward, you are interrupting official court proceedings. Control yourself or be held in contempt." Harold's gaze shifted to the judge, calculation briefly replacing rage. "Your Honor," he said, making a visible effort to speak calmly, "there's been a misunderstanding. My wife is unwell, prone to imagining things. I've only come to take her and our children home where they belong." "That won't be possible, Mr. Ward," Judge Sullivan replied evenly. "I have just granted your wife's petition for divorce and issued a protective order prohibiting you from approaching her or the children." Harold's facade of reasonableness shattered. "You can't do that," he shouted, renewing his struggles against the sheriff's grip. "She's my wife." "Those are my children." "Not anymore," the judge stated firmly. "Sheriff, please remove Mr. Ward from my chambers and inform him of the specific terms of the protective order. He is to remain at least 500 yards from Mrs. Ward and her children at all times, under penalty of imprisonment." As the sheriff and his deputy forcibly removed Harold from the room, his threats and curses echoing down the corridor, Penelope found herself trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. It had happened so quickly, the confrontation she had dreaded for days over in minutes. The legal freedom she had scarcely dared hope for granted with a few strokes of the judge's pen. Riley moved to her side, his steady presence anchoring her as the judge completed the necessary paperwork. "It's done," he murmured for her ears alone. "You're free, Penelope, free." The word resonated through her like the peal of a bell. Free from Harold's control, free to make her own choices, free to build a new life for herself and her children. She looked down at Thomas and Alina, their small faces upturned with cautious hope, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. They would never again live in fear of their father's rage. The legal proceedings concluded swiftly after Harold's removal. Judge Sullivan provided Penelope with copies of both the divorce decree and the protective order, advising her to keep them with her at all times. Sheriff Michaels returned briefly to confirm that Harold had been escorted to the saloon with strict instructions regarding the consequences of violating the order. "He's angry," the sheriff warned them bluntly. "And drunk, not a good combination. I'd advise leaving town for a few days, at least until he cools down or moves on." Riley nodded, thanking the sheriff for his assistance. "We have arrangements already in place," he assured him, not specifying details that might place Penelope and the children at risk if Harold managed to extract the information later. They left the courthouse through the same side door they had entered, Riley's vigilant gaze constantly scanning for any sign of trouble. Dr. Whitman and his wife had offered to host them for lunch before they departed, a kindness Penelope gratefully accepted. The children, tense throughout the hearing, needed time to relax in a safe environment before facing another journey. The meal at the Whitmans' home was simple but nourishing, the conversation carefully kept to neutral topics for the children's benefit. As they finished eating, Riley excused himself briefly to check on their transportation arrangements, returning with news that Jacob had arrived with the wagon and was waiting at the agreed location behind the livery stable. "We should leave soon," he advised, his expression serious. "I don't trust Harold to respect the judge's order, especially not while he's drinking." Penelope nodded, rising to help Ruth clear the table while the children gathered their few possessions. As she worked, a question that had been forming in her mind finally found voice. "What happens now?" She asked Riley quietly. "With us, I mean." Riley's expression softened, understanding the layers beneath her simple question. "That depends on what you want, Penelope. The judge's ruling means you're legally free to make your own choices. And if my choice is to accept your proposal?" She asked, meeting his gaze directly. "To build a life with you at your ranch." The joy that bloomed in Riley's eyes was answer enough, but he put it into words as well. "Then we could be married as soon as you wish, today even, if that's what you want." The idea was tempting the security of legal protection, the affirmation of the feelings that had grown between them, but Penelope shook her head slowly. "Not today," she said. "Not while Harold is still in town, still angry." I want our beginning to be just that, a beginning, not a reaction to what we're leaving behind. Riley nodded, understanding in his expression. Then we'll return to my ranch for now. When you're ready, truly ready, we can talk about next steps. Their departure from Alpine proceeded without incident. Jacob drove the wagon with Penelope and the children concealed within, while Riley rode alongside, vigilant for any sign of Harold or trouble. They took a circuitous route, doubling back and using less traveled paths to ensure they weren't followed. By nightfall, they reached Riley's ranch, the familiar silhouette of the house against the darkening sky bringing an unexpected sense of homecoming to Penelope. The children, too, seemed to relax as they recognized their surroundings, Thomas immediately looking for Scout while Alina asked if she could sleep in the same nice bed as before. The next week passed in a gentle rhythm of domestic activity and cautious planning. Jacob returned to his own ranch, but Maria stayed on, her presence providing both practical help and proper chaperonage for Penelope's continued residence in Riley's home. The arrangement was temporary but necessary, a concession to propriety that would protect Penelope's reputation in the community they hoped to make their permanent home. News from Alpine, brought by trusted friends, indicated that Harold had indeed violated the protective order, attempting to force information about Penelope's whereabouts from several townspeople. Sheriff Michaels had arrested him promptly, and Judge Sullivan had sentenced him to 30 days in the territorial jail with a stern warning that any further violations would result in more severe consequences. "It buys us time," Riley observed when Jacob brought this news. "But not a permanent solution." "What would be permanent?" Penelope asked that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children were inside with Maria, helping prepare for the next day's baking. Riley considered the question carefully, his expression thoughtful. "Harold won't give up easily," he acknowledged. "His pride won't allow it, but men like him eventually move on to easier targets when resistance proves too difficult or costly. So our strategy is to make his pursuit too troublesome to maintain," Penelope clarified. "Partly," Riley agreed, "but also to establish our life so firmly, so publicly, that challenging it becomes increasingly difficult." He turned to face her directly. "Penelope, I meant what I said before. I want to marry you, to be a father to Thomas and Alina, to build a family together. Not just as protection from Harold, but because I've come to love you." The declaration, spoken simply but with profound sincerity, filled Penelope's heart with a warmth that banished the lingering shadows of her past. "I love you too," she replied softly, the words feeling both momentous and natural. "And I would be honored to be your wife." Their wedding took place 3 weeks later, after Harold's release from jail and subsequent departure from Alpine, not fleeing. He had told anyone who would listen, but pursuing business opportunities in El Paso. Few believed this explanation, but most were relieved to see him go, especially when Sheriff Michaels confirmed he had indeed left on the eastbound stage. The ceremony was small but joyful, held in the town's small church with Jacob serving as best man and Maria as matron of honor. Thomas proudly carried the rings, his serious face transformed by a smile of genuine happiness when the minister pronounced Riley and Penelope husband and wife. Alina, dressed in a new frock Maria had helped sew for the occasion, scattered wildflower petals with delighted abandon. As Riley kissed his bride, a sense of rightness settled over Penelope, a feeling of having found her true home not in a place, but in a person. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but they would face them together, a family united by choice and love rather than obligation. The seasons turned, life on the ranch settled into comfortable patterns, and Penelope found herself blooming in ways she had never imagined possible. Riley proved to be everything Harold was not: patient, kind, respectful of her opinions and needs. He treated Thomas and Alina as his own, guiding them with firm but loving boundaries, celebrating their unique personalities rather than attempting to control them. Thomas thrived under Riley's tutelage, learning the skills of ranching with enthusiastic dedication. By his 6th birthday, he was riding his own pony, helping with simple chores and developing a confidence that transformed him from a wary, watchful child to a lively, curious boy. Eleanor, too, flourished in the secure environment Riley and Penelope created. Her nightmares faded, replaced by peaceful sleep and days filled with exploration and play. She developed a particular affinity for the ranch's animals, especially the new kittens born in the barn that spring, and showed a natural aptitude for nurturing that warmed Penelope's heart. The following summer brought another blessing, the birth of their son, James Riley Kendrick, a healthy, robust baby with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's quiet determination. As Penelope cradled her newborn, while Thomas and Eleanor crowded close to examine their brother with fascinated wonder, Riley stood watching them, his expression a mixture of pride, joy, and fierce protectiveness. "He's perfect," Riley said softly, sitting beside Penelope on the bed and gently tracing James's tiny features with one finger. "Just like his mother." Penelope leaned against her husband's strong shoulder, contentment filling her despite the exhaustion of childbirth. "We did it, Riley," she murmured. "We found safety. We found home." Riley pressed a kiss to her temple, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "And we'll keep it safe," he promised. "Always." The years that followed brought both joy and challenges. Harold reappeared once when James was nearly 2, making a drunken attempt to confront Penelope in Alpine while she was shopping with the children. Riley, alerted by a concerned townsperson, arrived swiftly, his mere presence enough to deter Harold from physical confrontation. Sheriff Michaels arrested Harold for violating the still active protective order, and Judge Sullivan sentenced him to 6 months in the territorial prison with a clear warning that any future violations would result in even harsher penalties. It was the last they saw of Harold Ward. Rumors eventually reached them that he had died in a barroom brawl in New Mexico territory, but whether true or not, he never returned to disturb the life Penelope and Riley had built together. By the time James started school, the Kendrick Ranch had prospered under Riley's careful management and Penelope's support. They had added a new wing to the house to accommodate their growing family. Twin daughters, Sarah and Ruth, had joined them 2 years after James's birth, completing their family with rambunctious energy and mischievous smiles. Thomas, now 12, had developed into a responsible young man who helped Riley with ranch operations while excelling in his studies at the Alpine school. His natural leadership abilities and thoughtful nature suggested a promising future, perhaps in law like his stepfather or in ranch management. Eleanor, at 10, showed artistic talent that Riley encouraged by ordering special drawing papers and pencils from San Antonio. She filled sketchbooks with detailed renderings of ranch life, the animals, the landscape, her siblings playing in the yard, capturing moments of beauty that others might overlook. One evening, as autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold, Penelope stood on the porch watching Riley teach James how to throw a lasso in the yard. The boy's attempts were comically unsuccessful, but Riley's patience never wavered, his encouragement steady as James tried again and again. Thomas sat nearby, offering occasional tips from his greater experience, while Eleanor sketched the scene, and the twins built elaborate structures with sticks and stones, their heads bent together in identical concentration. The sight filled Penelope with a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. From terror and desperation beneath an overturned wagon to this life of purpose and joy, it seemed almost miraculous. When Riley glanced up and caught sight of her watching, his smile was as warm and reassuring as it had been that first day. He said something to James and Thomas, then crossed the yard to join her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist with the easy affection that still made her heart beat faster. "Happy?" he asked simply, following her gaze to their children at play. Penelope leaned into his embrace, the solid strength of him as comforting now as it had been when she first learned to trust it. "Beyond words," she replied. "I never imagined life could be this good, Riley turned to face her fully, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "You deserved this all along, Penelope. Safety, happiness, love. We built it together," she corrected softly. "From that first day when you found us and chose to help." "Best decision I ever made," Riley said with absolute conviction before lowering his head to kiss her a kiss that held all the tenderness of their beginning, all the passion of their present, and all the promise of their future together. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the land they called home, Penelope Kendrick gave thanks for the courage that had driven her to flee a life of fear, and for the man whose compassion and love had helped her create something beautiful from the ashes of her past. Their story, which had begun in desperation, had transformed into one of hope-fulfilled proof that even in the harshest wilderness, love could take root and flourish, strong and enduring as the land itself.